The two police officers radiated a predatory calm that chilled Margaret Hale more than the shattered glass on her kitchen floor. They moved through her small, quiet home, not with the careful concern of protectors, but with the appraising eyes of auctioneers. "It's a real shame, ma'am," the taller one, Mercer, said, his voice a slick, rehearsed sympathy. "These druggies, they've got no respect." While Mercer distracted her, his partner Harker drifted into the bedroom. A minute later, they were gone, leaving only a hollow report number and a deeper sense of violation. It wasn't until an hour later that Margaret realized the true theft hadn't been a random junkie taking a few trinkets. Her life savings, tucked away in a shoebox, a secret she'd tearfully confessed to the officers, was gone. The predators had been wearing badges. Margaret Hale had lived in the same pale blue bungalow on Maple Street for 47 years. It was a house of quiet routines and cherished memories, each scuff on the hardwood floor a story, every teacup in the china cabinet a ghost of a shared conversation. At 78, she was a bastion of gentle self-reliance. Her garden was immaculate, her checkbook was balanced to the penny, and her mind, though prone to the occasional misplacement of keys, remained sharp. The house was her fortress, a bulwark against a world that seemed to be spinning faster and faster into chaos. That Tuesday afternoon, the chaos breached the walls. It started with a sound from the back of the house, a sharp, splintering crack followed by the tinkle of falling glass. Margaret's heart hammered against her ribs. She was in the living room knitting a sweater for a grandchild who was now a sophomore in college, the television murmuring a soap opera in the background. She froze, the yarn slipping from her fingers. Silence descended again, thick and menacing. She held her breath, listening. Were they still inside? Her hand, trembling, reached for the old rotary phone on the end table. She dialed 911, her voice a reedy whisper as she reported a break-in. The dispatcher's calm, professional tone was a small anchor in a sea of panic. "Officers are on their way, ma'am. Are you in a safe location?" I'm in the living room," she stammered. "I don't know where he is." The wait was an eternity condensed into 7 minutes. Every creak of the old house was the footstep of an intruder. Finally, the reassuring thud of a car door echoed from the street, followed by firm knocks on her front door. Peeking through the curtains, she saw a police cruiser parked at the curb. Relief washed over her, so potent it left her weak. She opened the door to 2 officers. The one who introduced himself as Officer Mercer was tall and lean, with a smile that didn't quite reach his cool, assessing eyes. The other, Officer Harker, was shorter, built like a fire plug, with a bored, impassive expression. "Ma'am," Mercer began, his voice smooth as honey. "You reported a break-in?" "Yes, the kitchen window," Margaret said, ushering them in. "I heard it break. I was so frightened." They followed her to the kitchen. A rock lay on the linoleum amidst a spray of shattered glass from the window over the sink. It was a textbook smash and grab. Mercer knelt, poking at the rock with a pen. "Happens all the time. Scumbags looking for a quick score. Did you see anyone?" "No, I stayed in the living room. I was too scared." Harker walked through the small house with a heavy, methodical tread, his eyes scanning everything. "Looks like they were in and out," he announced from the hallway. "Probably just grabbed whatever they could see and ran. Jewelry box on the dresser is empty." Margaret's hand flew to her neck, where a simple gold locket, a gift from her late husband, always rested. She hadn't even thought to check her jewelry box. Inside were a few heirlooms, her mother's pearls, a pair of sapphire earrings, things of sentimental, not monetary value. "Did they get anything else?" Mercer asked, his gaze lingering on her. "Anything of significant value? Cash, anything like that?" The question, so direct, broke through her composure. A wave of fresh panic crested within her. Her emergency fund, the money she'd painstakingly saved over 2 decades, cash from side jobs, birthday checks, the little bit left over from her pension each month. It was her nest egg, her security, the fund that ensured she would never be a burden to her son. It was nearly $10,000, tucked away in an old hush puppy's shoebox at the back of her closet. Tears welled in her eyes. My savings, she whispered, the confession wrenched from her. I keep some cash hidden, for emergencies. Mercer's expression softened into one of deep, practiced concern. Where, ma'am? We need to know exactly what's missing for the report. In my bedroom closet, she said, her voice trembling. In a shoebox. Harker, who had conveniently just finished his sweep of the bedroom, exchanged a flicker of a glance with Mercer. It was so fast, so subtle, that in her distressed state, Margaret barely registered it. Okay, Mercer said, patting her arm with a paternalistic gentleness that felt strangely cold. Let's not panic. Officer Harker and I will have a thorough look around, see if we can find any prints, though it's unlikely. Why don't you sit down and try to calm your nerves? We'll handle this. They spent another 20 minutes in the house. She heard them moving around, their voices low and professional. They spoke of dusting for prints, of canvassing the neighbors. It was all very official, all very reassuring. Finally, Mercer returned to the living room with a clipboard. Well, ma'am, it's like we thought. They were fast. Probably kids or junkies. We've got all the information we need for the report. We'll put a watch on the house for the next few nights. He handed her a slip of paper with a case number on it. If you notice anything else missing, just give us a call. With a final tip of their hats, they left. Margaret watched their cruiser pull away, the red and blue lights silent. The house felt immense and empty, the silence no longer peaceful, but threatening. The violation lingered in the air, a greasy film on her cherished memories. She sat for a long time, the slip of paper clutched in her hand. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room. A cold dread, a suspicion she couldn't yet articulate, began to coil in her stomach. She pushed herself to her feet and walked on unsteady legs to the bedroom. Her heart pounded as she opened the closet door. The scent of cedar and mothballs filled her nostrils. She reached to the back of the top shelf, behind the winter blankets. Her fingers found the familiar cardboard edge of the Hush Puppies box. For a second, relief flooded through her. It was still there. She pulled it down. It felt light. With trembling hands, she lifted the lid. Inside, where stacks of 20s, 50s, and 100s had been carefully bundled with rubber bands, there was nothing. The box was empty. Margaret stared, her mind refusing to process the void. They hadn't taken the jewelry box. She'd checked, and the few valuable pieces were gone, as Harker had said. But this was everything. The thief who broke the window couldn't have known where to look. It was a secret hiding place, one she had guarded for years, a secret she had, in a moment of pure, undiluted terror, revealed to the 2 men who were supposed to protect her. The slick smile on Officer Mercer's face flashed in her mind, the fleeting, almost imperceptible glance he'd shared with his partner. The cold, efficient way they had managed her, controlled her fear, and extracted her secret. The dawning horror was a physical thing, a crushing weight on her chest that stole her breath. They hadn't come to investigate a crime. They had come to finish it. Daniel Hale existed in a world of meticulously controlled chaos. His life was a series of encrypted communications, sterile briefing rooms, and long, silent flights to places that didn't officially exist on any map. As the FBI's premier covert operative, known only by the call sign Spectre, he was a weapon forged in the fires of Langley and sharpened on the whetstone of international espionage. He dealt in secrets and shadows, a ghost in the global machine. He was in a debriefing at a secure facility outside D.C., the air thick with the hum of servers and the scent of stale coffee, when his personal phone vibrated. It was a satellite phone, heavily encrypted, with only one number programmed into it: his mother's. He had a strict rule: never answer during an operation. But this was different. He was stateside, between assignments, and the call was a tether to the only part of his life that was real, the part that had existed before the aliases and the art of deception became his trade. He excused himself, stepping into a soundproofed hallway. "Mom?" he answered, his voice softer than the one he used in his professional life. "Daniel, sweetheart, I hope I'm not bothering you." Her voice was bright, too bright. It was the voice she used when she was trying to convince him everything was fine, a carefully constructed cheerfulness that was as clear a tell to him as a poker player's twitch. "Never a bother, Mom. What's up?" he asked, leaning against the cool concrete wall. He was already scanning her words, analyzing the pitch, the cadence, the slight hesitation before she spoke. "Oh, just a little excitement over here on Maple Street. Can you believe it? We had a break-in this afternoon." She laughed, a brittle, airy sound. "Some kids, I suppose. Broke the kitchen window. The police were here and everything. Very professional." Daniel's posture straightened. His senses, honed by years of threat assessment, went on high alert. "A break-in? Are you okay? Were you hurt?" "Oh, heavens, no, I'm perfectly fine. They just took a few of my old trinkets from the jewelry box. Silly things, really, more sentimental than anything." There it was again, the forced casualness, the downplaying. His mother was not a woman to dismiss sentiment. The silly things in that box were pieces of her history, pieces of his father. He heard the tremor she was trying so hard to conceal, the subtle waver that betrayed the carefully constructed facade. "They took Grandma's pearls?" he asked, his voice low and even. A pause, a fraction of a second, too long. "Yes. Well, it's just a thing, Daniel. The important thing is that I'm safe." He closed his eyes. He could picture her in her small, tidy living room, clutching the phone, trying to protect him from worry, just as she had done his entire life. But he wasn't a little boy anymore. He was the man who hunted monsters, and he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that a monster had just walked through his mother's house. "What did the police say?" he asked. "Oh, they were very helpful. 2 officers, Mercer and Harker. They said it was probably drug addicts. They took a report, gave me a number. They're going to keep an eye on the house." "Mercer and Harker," he repeated, committing the names to memory. "And they looked everywhere? Checked the whole house?" "Yes, they were very thorough." Her voice faltered for a moment. "Very thorough." The break in her voice was a crack in a dam, and in the space it created, Daniel felt a tidal wave of cold fury building. Something was wrong, deeply, fundamentally wrong. This was more than a simple burglary. "I'm coming home," he said. It wasn't a question or a suggestion. It was a statement of fact. "Oh, Daniel, no. You don't have to do that. It's all over. I'm fine, really. You have your important work to do." "I'm clearing my schedule," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'll be there tomorrow afternoon. Don't talk to anyone else about this until I get there. Understand?" "But Daniel—" "Mom, please." She sighed, a sound of resignation mixed with a mother's secret relief. "All right, sweetheart. If you think you should." "I do," he said. "I'll see you tomorrow. I love you." "I love you too, dear." He ended the call and stood motionless in the sterile hallway. The professional mask slid back into place, but his eyes were like chips of ice. The men and women he worked with knew Spectre as a cool, detached instrument of national security. They had never seen the man behind the call sign, the son of Margaret Hale. He walked back into the debriefing room. His supervisor, a stern, gray-haired man named Paul Rennick, looked up. "Everything all right, Hale?" "I need to take some personal leave," Daniel said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Family matter." Paul Rennick studied him for a moment, recognizing a shift in the man he'd known for a decade. He saw a stillness in Daniel that was more dangerous than any overt display of anger. It was the calm at the center of a hurricane. "Take as long as you need," Paul Rennick said. He knew better than to ask for details. When Spector had that look in his eyes, it meant someone, somewhere, had made a grave mistake. And that mistake was about to be rectified. The scent of honeysuckle and freshly cut grass was the first thing that hit Daniel as he stepped out of his nondescript rental car onto Maple Street. It was the smell of his childhood, of summer evenings spent catching fireflies in the yard, while his mother's wind chimes played a gentle melody on the porch. But today, the familiar scent was tainted, overlaid with a faint, metallic tang of violation. He found his mother in the garden, tending her roses. She looked smaller than he remembered, her shoulders slightly stooped. When she saw him, her face broke into a genuine smile for the first time, he suspected, since the incident. She hugged him tightly, and for a moment, he let himself be just a son, drawing strength from the familiar comfort of her embrace. "You didn't have to come," she whispered into his shoulder. "Yes, I did," he said, pulling back to look at her. He saw the fine lines of stress around her eyes, the faint purple shadows beneath them. "Let's go inside. I want you to walk me through everything." Exactly as it happened. Inside, the house was as tidy as ever, but Daniel's trained eyes saw the subtle signs of disturbance. The faint scuff mark on the wall where a heavy boot had brushed against it. The slight misalignment of a picture frame in the hallway. The kitchen window was now covered with a piece of plywood, a crude patch on the skin of his home. He sat his mother down at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea, his own movements calm and deliberate. He didn't press or interrogate. He listened. He let her tell the story in her own time, his gaze steady and reassuring. She described the sound of the breaking glass, her fear, the call to 911. Then she got to the arrival of Officers Mercer and Harker. "The tall one, Mercer. He did all the talking," she said, her hands wrapped around the warm mug. "He seemed so nice, so understanding." "And Harker?" Daniel prompted gently. "He was quiet, just walked around looking at things. He's the one who said my jewelry box was empty." She paused, her brow furrowing. "It was strange, Daniel. He said it before I'd even gone into the bedroom to check." Daniel's eyes sharpened, a detail a civilian would overlook, but to him it was a glaring procedural error. An officer would secure the scene, then ask the homeowner to identify what was missing. He wouldn't declare it himself. "And they asked you about cash," he stated more than asked. His mother looked up, surprised. "Yes. How did you know?" "It's a standard question. Tell me about that, Mom. Exactly what did Mercer ask?" "He asked if there was anything of significant value. I was so upset about the jewelry and the thought of someone being in my house. I just blurted it out. I told them about my emergency money. I told them where I kept it." Her voice cracked, and a single tear traced a path down her wrinkled cheek. "It was so stupid, Daniel. So stupid." "No," he said, his voice firm but gentle. He reached across the table and took her hand. "It wasn't stupid. You were scared. You were supposed to be able to trust them." He let her finish the story, describing how the officers had sent her to the living room while they conducted their search. He noted that they hadn't dusted for a single fingerprint. They hadn't taken a statement from the neighbor who was outside gardening 2 doors down. They had done nothing but manage his mother. After she finished, he stood up. "Okay, I'm going to have a look around myself. He started in the kitchen. The rock still lay on the counter where the officers had left it. He examined it, then the broken window. The angle was all wrong. To get this trajectory from the street, the thrower would have had to be standing in the middle of Mrs. Gable's prize-winning petunias next door. Unlikely. The entry was clumsy, designed to look like a panic job. He moved to the bedroom. He stood in the doorway, his eyes methodically scanning every surface, every object. This was his true expertise, reading a scene, finding the narrative in the details. The jewelry box was on the dresser, its lid open. A few costume pieces were scattered beside it, a deliberate bit of stage dressing. But there were no smudge marks, no signs of a frantic search. The drawers of the dresser were slightly ajar, but the clothes inside were still perfectly folded. A real thief, a junkie looking for a quick score, would have ransacked the place. This was surgical. He walked to the closet and looked at the empty shoebox on the shelf. He ran a gloved finger along the dusty shelf beside it. And there, he found it. A single faint swipe mark in the dust. Not a smudge from a searching hand, but a clean line, as if something had been set down and then picked up again. Something rectangular. Perhaps a police radio. It was all adding up to a conclusion that made his blood run cold. They had used the staged break-in as a pretext. Harker, while doing his initial sweep, had likely spotted the shoebox, a classic hiding spot. He hadn't touched it. He'd just noted it. Then, after Mercer had skillfully extracted the confirmation from his terrified mother, they had retrieved it during their second, more thorough search. They were organized, confident, and they were preying on the most vulnerable. He walked back into the kitchen. His face was a calm, impassive mask, but behind his eyes the specter was looking out. He knew who the enemy was. He had their names, and he knew with chilling certainty what he had to do. "Mom," he said, his voice quiet, "I need you to do me a favor. I'm going to go down to the police station to get a copy of the report. While I'm gone, I want you to call your sister. Go and stay with her for a few days." "Aunt Helen? Why?" "Because this isn't over," he said, the words hanging in the air with a weight that was absolute. "And I don't want you here when I finish it." The Northwood Police Precinct was a squat brick building that smelled of stale coffee, disinfectant, and quiet desperation. It was a place of worn-out linoleum floors and buzzing fluorescent lights, a world away from the gleaming high-tech corridors Daniel Hale usually inhabited. He walked through the doors not as Spectre, the ghost of the FBI, but as Daniel Hale, concerned son. He wore jeans, a simple gray t-shirt, and a jacket, unassuming civilian attire, but his posture, his economy of movement, and the unnerving stillness of his gaze set him apart from the usual parade of citizens who came through these doors. He approached the front desk, where a weary-looking sergeant was hunched over a computer. "Excuse me," Daniel said, his voice polite and even. "I'm here to get a copy of a police report. Case number 734B. The sergeant sighed, not looking up. "Fill out a request form. Come back in 3 to 5 business days." "It was for a break-in at my mother's house yesterday." "Margaret Hale," Daniel continued, his tone unchanged. "I was hoping to speak to the responding officers. Mercer and Harker, I believe." The sergeant finally looked up, his eyes doing a quick, dismissive scan. He saw a man of average height and build, nothing remarkable. "They're on patrol. They'll be in at the end of their shift. You can wait if you want." "I'll wait," Daniel said, and moved to a hard plastic chair against the wall, settling in for the long haul. He didn't read the tattered magazines or stare at his phone. He simply sat, perfectly still, and observed. He watched the flow of the precinct, the interactions between officers, the way they carried themselves. He was a predator in his natural habitat, learning the rhythms of the herd he was about to hunt. 3 hours later, Officers Mercer and Harker walked in, their laughter echoing in the drab hallway. They were loud, arrogant, full of the casual swagger of men who believed they were untouchable. They stopped short when they saw Daniel rise from his chair and approach them. "Officers Mercer and Harker?" Daniel asked. "Yeah, who's asking?" Mercer said, his smile from yesterday replaced with a look of mild annoyance. "My name is Daniel Hale. You responded to a call at my mother's house yesterday. Margaret Hale." Recognition dawned in Mercer's eyes, followed by a flicker of something else. Caution. "Right, the B&E on Maple. A real shame. Your mother's a sweet lady." "She is," Daniel agreed, his expression unreadable. "I was hoping to ask a few follow-up questions about the investigation." Harker shifted his weight, crossing his thick arms over his chest. "It's all in the report, pal. We did our sweep, didn't find any prints. Perp was in and out, not much to follow up on." "You're sure about that?" Daniel asked, his voice soft. "No prints at all? Not on the rock, not on the broken glass, not on the jewelry box you said was empty?" Mercer's easy confidence began to fray at the edges. This wasn't the typical worried family member. There was an unnerving precision to this man's questions. "Look, we're professionals. We know how to process a scene. It was a clean job." "So clean you didn't feel the need to canvass the neighbors?" Daniel pressed, his gaze never leaving Mercer's face. "Or to secure the rock that was used to break the window as evidence?" "We've got a heavy caseload," Harker grunted, stepping forward slightly. It was a subtle physical assertion of dominance. "We prioritize. A simple smash and grab doesn't get the full CSI treatment." "I see," Daniel said. He let a beat of silence hang in the air, a silence that became suddenly uncomfortable for the two officers. He wasn't accusing them, not yet. He was simply holding a mirror up to their shoddy work, and they didn't like the reflection. "My mother is also missing some cash," Daniel said, dropping the statement into the tense silence. "A significant amount. She mentioned it to you." Mercer's face became a mask of professional concern. "She did, and we noted it in the report. Unfortunately, cash is untraceable. It's the first thing these guys go for." "She kept it in a very specific place," Daniel continued, his eyes boring into Mercer. "A place no random thief would know to look." The air crackled. This was the line. Daniel had just walked right up to it. He watched for the tell, a tightening of the jaw, a glance between partners, a defensive shift in posture. He got all three. Mercer took a step closer, his voice dropping to a low, intimidating growl. "Are you implying something, Mr. Hale?" "I'm just a son trying to understand what happened to his mother," Daniel said, his calm a stark contrast to Mercer's barely concealed aggression. "She's an elderly woman alone, and she was robbed. I would think that would warrant more than a 20-minute visit and a case number." "We did our job," Harker snapped. "If you have a problem, you can file a complaint with the watch commander." "I don't think that will be necessary," Daniel said. He held their gaze for another moment, letting them feel the full, unnerving weight of his focus. He had what he needed. He had seen the guilt in their eyes, felt the brittle defense in their words. They were dirty. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Thank you for your time, officers." He turned and walked away, his back straight, his stride unhurried. He could feel their eyes on him, a mixture of anger, confusion, and a newfound sliver of fear. They didn't know who he was. They just knew he wasn't the civilian pushover they had mistaken him for. As he walked out of the precinct and into the fading afternoon light, the two cops watched him go. "What the hell was that?" Harker muttered. "Just some guy with a big mouth," Mercer said, though his voice lacked conviction. "He'll make some noise and go away." But as he watched Daniel Hale disappear down the street, a cold knot of unease tightened in his gut. There was something about the man's eyes. It was like looking into the eyes of a wolf, calm, intelligent, and absolutely lethal. For the first time in a long and profitable career of preying on the weak, Officer Mercer felt a genuine prickle of fear. Back in the sterile anonymity of a hotel room 20 miles from Maple Street, Daniel Hale shed the skin of the concerned son and became the Spectre once more. The room transformed into a makeshift command center. A laptop, connected to a military-grade encryption device, hummed quietly on the desk. A satellite phone sat beside it, his only link to a world these small-town cops couldn't even imagine. His first call was to a number that technically didn't exist. It was answered on the first ring. "Nadia," he said, his voice clipped and professional. "Spectre," came the reply. Nadia Reyes was the FBI's best-kept secret, a data analyst and cyber forensics genius who could pull a digital needle out of a global haystack. "You're not due back on the grid for another week. This isn't a social call. I need a favor, off the books." "My favorite kind," she said, the sound of furious typing already audible in the background. "What's the hunt?" "2 police officers, Northwood PD, Officer Roy Mercer and Officer Cole Harker. I need everything you can find on them. Service records, financials, complaints, commendations. I want to know what they had for breakfast this morning." "Small fish for a big shark like you," Nadia observed. "They swam into the wrong pond," Daniel replied, his voice flat. "This is a level 1 priority. I need it fast." "Consider it done. I'll build you a ghost profile. You'll have a preliminary file within the hour." The line went dead. Daniel trusted Nadia implicitly. She was a digital phantom, capable of slipping through the most secure firewalls without leaving a trace. While she worked, he began his own, more analog investigation. He pulled up a map of Northwood and the surrounding counties, cross-referencing recent burglary reports with a specific set of parameters: victims over the age of 70, non-forced entry or crudely staged break-ins, and reports of missing cash or valuables that were noted after the initial police response. The work was tedious, a methodical sifting through digital paperwork. But Daniel was patient. He knew that predators, whether they were terrorists or dirty cops, always had a pattern. They grew comfortable, lazy, and they repeated their methods. Less than an hour later, his encrypted laptop chimed. Nadia's file had arrived. He opened it, his eyes scanning the data with practiced speed. At first glance, Mercer and Harker were model cops. Mercer had 15 years on the force, a handful of commendations for bravery, a wife, 2 kids, and a mortgage on a modest suburban house. Harker was younger, a 10-year veteran, ex-military police, with a reputation as a hard-nosed, effective patrolman. Their service records were clean. Too clean. Daniel dug deeper into the financials Nadia had pulled from a dozen different sources, and there the thread began to appear. Mercer's salary was a matter of public record, $62,000 a year. Yet he was driving a brand-new $70,000 pickup truck. He had paid for a family vacation to Hawaii 3 months ago, in cash. His bank accounts showed a series of structured deposits, always just under the $10,000 federal reporting limit from a variety of ATMs across the state. Harker's profile was similar. His salary was $55,000. He had recently bought a high-end bass boat, a $20,000 toy, and paid for it outright. He was a regular at a high-stakes poker game where he was known to lose heavily but always had more cash to burn. Their lifestyles didn't match their paychecks. It was a classic red flag, but one that was easily missed by a sleepy internal affairs department. Then Daniel found the section Nadia had flagged in red: civilian complaints. There were 3 over the past 2 years, all filed against Mercer and Harker as a pair. All 3 had been dismissed for lack of evidence. Daniel's heart rate quickened. He clicked on the first one. The complainant was an 82-year-old man named Walter Briggs. The details of his report were chillingly familiar. He had called the police to report a suspected prowler. Officers Mercer and Harker had responded. They had conducted a search of his home. The next day, Mr. Briggs discovered that a collection of rare coins, his entire life's savings, was missing from a locked box in his study, a box he had pointed out to the officers during their search. The second complaint was from a 79-year-old widow, a minor kitchen fire. Mercer and Harker responded. A few days later, her late husband's expensive watches were gone. The third was from a couple in their late 70s. They had reported their car stolen. Mercer and Harker took the report. The car was found abandoned a few days later, but the emergency cash the couple kept in the glove compartment had vanished. In every case, the victims were elderly, vulnerable, and likely to be dismissed as forgetful or confused. In every case, Mercer and Harker were the responding officers, and in every case, the complaint had been investigated by one of their own sergeants and quietly buried. This wasn't just a one-time crime against his mother. This was a systematic campaign of predation. They were using their badges as a key to unlock the doors of the most vulnerable members of the community, and they were robbing them blind under the guise of protection. The cold fury inside Daniel solidified into a diamond-hard resolve. This was no longer just personal. It was a cancer that had metastasized within the Northwood PD, and he was the surgeon who was going to cut it out. He looked at the name on the first complaint again. Walter Briggs. According to the file, he was now a resident at the Oak Haven nursing home. Daniel closed the laptop. He knew his next move. The digital thread had led him this far. Now it was time to see if it would hold up in the real world. He needed to talk to Mr. Briggs. He needed a witness. Oak Haven nursing home smelled of antiseptic, overcooked broccoli, and faded memories. It was a place of quiet desperation, where the television was always too loud and the clocks seemed to move too slowly. Daniel Hale walked its polished hallways, feeling like an intruder from a different, faster world. He had traded his tactical gear for a pair of slacks and a polo shirt. His demeanor softened from investigator to concerned grandson. He found Walter Briggs in a small, sunlit room, sitting in a wheelchair by the window, a tattered photo album open on his lap. He was a frail man, his skin as thin and translucent as parchment, his eyes clouded with age and regret. "Mr. Briggs?" Daniel said softly from the doorway. The old man looked up, his gaze unfocused at first. "Do I know you?" "No, sir. My name is Tom. I'm a volunteer here," Daniel lied smoothly. "I was told you like to talk about history. I'm a bit of a history buff myself." He gestured to the photo album. "Looks like you've got some stories there." A faint spark of interest flickered in Walter's eyes. "My wife, Helen," he said, his voice raspy. "And this was my boy, Robert. Lost him in Nam." Daniel pulled up a chair, not crowding the man, giving him space. He didn't ask about the coins, about the robbery. That would come later. For now, he just listened. He listened to stories of the Great Depression, of serving in the Pacific during World War II, of meeting Helen at a dance and building a life with her, piece by piece. He was patient, his attention genuine. He wasn't just playing a role, he was bearing witness to a life, earning the currency of trust. After an hour, Walter fell silent, his gaze drifting back to the window. "They think I'm a foolish old man," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The police, my own kids even. They think I misplaced them, but I didn't." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "Misplaced what, Walter?" "My coins," the old man said, his eyes filling with a frustrated sadness. "My collection. A Morgan silver dollar from every year they minted them. It was my retirement, my legacy for my grandchildren." He turned to Daniel, his gaze sharp and lucid. "The two policemen took them. I know they did." "Tell me about them," Daniel said, his voice gentle, encouraging. Walter's story tumbled out, a torrent of frustration and indignity. He described the prowler scare, his call to the police. He described the arrival of a tall, smooth-talking officer and his quiet, brutish partner. "He was so nice, the tall one. Walter recounted, the memory still vivid. Said he collected coins himself, asked to see mine. Like a fool, I showed him. I was proud of them. He described how the officer had held the 1895 Morgan dollar, the crown jewel of his collection, admiring it. He knew its value. I saw it in his eyes. The story mirrored his mother's in its essential heartbreaking details. The manufactured concern, the professional manipulation, the theft hidden behind the shield of a badge. I filed a report, Walter said, his voice growing stronger with the remembered anger. They sent a sergeant to talk to me. He treated me like a child, asked if I was sure I hadn't moved them, if my memory was what it used to be. His hands clenched into frail fists on the arms of his wheelchair. They stole from me, and then they told the world I was crazy. I believe you, Walter, Daniel said, his voice resonating with a sincerity that cut through the old man's despair. Walter stared at him, his cloudy eyes searching Daniel's face. He saw something there he hadn't seen in a long time: respect, validation. No one else does, Walter whispered. I do, Daniel repeated. And I'm going to do something about it. But I need your help. I need you to be willing to tell your story again, to someone who will listen. A flicker of fear crossed Walter's face. They're policemen. What can anyone do? You let me worry about that, Daniel said. All I need to know is, are you willing to fight for your legacy? The old man looked down at the photo of his late wife, then back at Daniel. The slump in his shoulders straightened. The fire he thought had long been extinguished rekindled into a small, defiant ember. Yes, Walter Briggs said, his voice firm. I am. Daniel left Oakhaven with a crucial piece of the puzzle locked in place, a pattern of behavior and a credible witness. Mercer and Harker weren't just thieves, they were gaslighters, systematically destroying the credibility of their victims to cover their tracks. His next call was to Nadia. I need more, he said the moment she answered. The complaints I saw were the ones that were officially filed. I'm willing to bet there are others that never went that far. People who were intimidated, or who thought no one would believe them. I need you to cross-reference Mercer and Harker's response history for the last 5 years with 911 calls from residents over 70. Look for any call that didn't result in a formal report. Look for whispers, for anything that seems out of place. You're asking me to find crimes that were never reported, Nadia said, a note of professional admiration in her voice. That's like hunting for ghosts. That's why I called you, Daniel replied. Start digging. He was no longer just unraveling a thread. He was weaving a net. And with every whisper he gathered, every forgotten victim he identified, the mesh grew stronger, ready to be cast over two predators who thought they were untouchable. Nadia Reyes operated in the ethereal realm of pure data, a world of ones and zeros where secrets were buried in mountains of digital noise. For her, Daniel's request wasn't just a task, it was a challenge, a hunt through the electronic ghosts of the Northwood PD's past. She unleashed a suite of custom algorithms, digital bloodhounds designed to sniff out the faintest scent of correlation in the vast wilderness of raw data. Her target, the nexus of Mercer, Harker, elderly callers, and unresolved incidents. The results began to trickle in, then flow, then flood. A 911 call from an 80-year-old woman reporting a strange car on her street. Mercer and Harker respond. They spend 30 minutes at the residence. No report is filed. 2 weeks later, the woman's son reports that his mother's wedding ring is missing, but she is too confused to remember when she last saw it. Another call. A 75-year-old man, a widower, calls about his newspaper being stolen. A trivial complaint. But Mercer and Harker respond personally. They are inside his house for 45 minutes. Again, no report. A month later, the man's daughter discovers that her father's collection of antique fountain pens is gone. He blames the home health aide, who is fired. The pattern was insidious, a shadow campaign of petty, untraceable thefts hidden behind the facade of community policing. They were leveraging the trust of the elderly, using minor, often imagined fears as a key to get inside their homes. They were masters of their craft, choosing victims who were unlikely to be believed, whose memories were fading, or whose families lived far away. But their greed was making them sloppy. Nadia's real breakthrough came when she cracked the firewall of a small, independent accounting firm that handled the books for a local pawn shop and a used car dealership. It was a long shot, but Daniel's instincts about their finances had been nagging at her. And there it was, the ghost in the machine. Both businesses were owned by the same man, a cousin of Roy Mercer's wife. And both businesses showed a series of cash transactions that were meticulously, almost artistically, laundered. A set of antique fountain pens sold for $5,000. Rare coins, matching Walter Briggs's description, sold piecemeal over several months for a total of nearly $30,000. A collection of vintage watches, a diamond wedding ring. The pawn shop was their fence, turning stolen memories into untraceable cash. The car dealership was their laundry, washing the money clean through inflated sales prices and phantom repair invoices. Mercer's new truck and Harker's base boat had both been purchased through this dealership. Nadia compiled the data into a clear, damning timeline. The 911 call, the police response, the subsequent cash deposit at the pawn shop, followed by a corresponding deposit into Mercer or Harker's hidden accounts. It was a perfectly choreographed dance of crime and corruption. She packaged the encrypted file and sent it to Daniel with a simple two-word message: checkmate. Back in his hotel room, Daniel reviewed the file, a cold, clinical satisfaction settling over him. This was the irrefutable proof, the digital skeleton of their entire operation. He now had the what, the how, and the why. He had the money trail, the pattern, and the witnesses. Any other law enforcement officer would take this evidence to a prosecutor. A case would be built, indictments handed down. It would take months, maybe years. Lawyers would get involved. Mercer and Harker would use their knowledge of the system to exploit every loophole. They would paint their elderly victims as senile and confused. They might even get away with it. But Daniel Hale wasn't any other law enforcement officer. He wasn't interested in the slow, grinding wheels of the justice system. He was interested in justice. Swift, undeniable, and absolute. He knew he couldn't simply arrest them. They were cops. They would have the immediate support of their union and the benefit of the doubt from their department. He needed more than evidence. He needed a confession. He needed to catch them in the act, red-handed, with no room for denial, no space for a lie. His gaze drifted to the picture on his phone's lock screen. It was a photo of his mother, smiling in her garden, the embodiment of everything he fought to protect. They had brought their darkness into her world, and now he was going to bring his into theirs. A plan began to form in his mind, audacious and dangerous. It was a classic Spectre operation, using the enemy's own tactics against them, turning their strengths into weaknesses. They were confident. They were arrogant. They believed they were smarter than anyone in this sleepy town. He was going to use that arrogance to spring a trap. And the bait would be the one thing they couldn't resist, another easy score. He would use his own mother's house, the very place where this had all begun. He would give them one last opportunity to be the predators they were. But this time, the hunter would be waiting in the shadows. The plan was a high-wire act requiring meticulous planning and flawless execution. Daniel's first priority was his mother. He drove back to her sister's house, a small, cozy home in a neighboring town, and sat with her in the sun-drenched kitchen. "Mom, I need to ask you for a big favor," he began, his voice serious. "I need you to trust me, even if it doesn't make sense." He explained that he believed the break-in was not random and that he was working to find the people responsible. He didn't give her the details. He didn't want to burden her with the knowledge that the culprits were policemen. but he conveyed the gravity of the situation. "I need the house to be empty for a couple of days," he said, "and I need your spare key." Margaret looked at her son, at the quiet intensity in his eyes, and she saw the man he had become, the deep well of strength, the unshakable resolve. She didn't understand his world, but she understood him. "Whatever you need, Daniel," she said, her voice firm. She trusted him completely. With his mother safe, Daniel returned to Maple Street under the cover of darkness. The pale blue bungalow became his operational theater. For the next several hours, he worked with the silent, efficient precision of a ghost. The house was his, a place he knew better than anyone. He knew which floorboards creaked, which doors whispered when they opened. He began by installing the surveillance. This wasn't off-the-shelf equipment. It was state-of-the-art FBI technology, miniaturized and virtually undetectable. A micro camera, no larger than a pinhead, was embedded in the frame of a landscape painting in the living room. Another was hidden in a smoke detector in the hallway. A third, with a direct view of the bedroom closet, was concealed within the face of an old alarm clock on the nightstand. High-fidelity audio recorders, capable of picking up a whisper from across the room, were placed in a light fixture and beneath a side table. Every device was wireless, feeding a live, encrypted signal directly to a hardened laptop in his rental car, which was now parked 3 blocks away. From there, the feed was bounced to a secure FBI server in Langley, creating an unimpeachable record of events. Next, he prepared the bait. He went to a bank and withdrew $10,000 in cash, requesting sequential, marked bills. He bundled the cash just as his mother had described, with old rubber bands, and placed it inside a different shoebox, a new pair of loafers he'd bought for the occasion. He placed the box on the top shelf of the bedroom closet, in the exact same spot where his mother's savings had been. It was an invitation. A dare. Finally, he set the stage for the inciting incident. He took the rock that had been used in the original break-in and walked to the side of the house, to a small window in the laundry room that was barely visible from the street. It was a more plausible point of entry for a petty thief. He took a deep breath, wrapped his hand in a thick cloth, and with a sharp, controlled motion, shattered the small pane of glass. The sound was a jarring violation of the night's quiet. His work inside was done. He slipped out of the house, locking the door behind him, melting back into the shadows. He moved to his car, a silent observer in a nondescript sedan. He fired up the laptop, and the interior of the car was bathed in the cool, blue-gray light of multiple video feeds. He saw his mother's empty living room, the quiet hallway, the baited closet. Everything was perfectly in place. He settled in to wait for morning. The trap was set. The bait was laid. All he had to do now was summon the rats. The morning sun cast a cheerful, deceptive light over Maple Street. It was a picture of suburban tranquility, sprinklers whispering across manicured lawns, a dog barking in the distance, the gentle hum of a neighborhood waking up. From his position 3 blocks away, Daniel Hale watched it all with the detached patience of a sniper. At precisely 9:15 a.m., he used a burner phone to dial 911. He didn't speak. Instead, he played a pre-recorded audio clip, the frantic, breathless voice of an elderly woman. "Help! Someone's broken into my neighbor's house, the blue one on the corner of Maple and Elm. I saw them run out the back." He used voice modulation software to make it untraceable, and the call itself was routed through multiple spoofed cell towers, making its origin impossible to pinpoint. He knew from Nadia's data that Mercer and Harker always started their patrol in this sector. The call was a piece of cheese placed directly in their path. He cut the connection and turned his attention to the police scanner app on his phone. Within 30 seconds, he heard the dispatcher's voice, clear and professional, routing a patrol car to a reported B&E at 124 Maple Street. A moment later, a familiar voice crackled in response. "Dispatch, This is car 12. Mercer and Harker. We're 2 blocks away. We'll take the call. Daniel allowed himself a grim, fleeting smile. The rats were heading for the trap. He watched them on the live camera feed he'd set up on a lamppost down the street. Their cruiser pulled up, its lights flashing but siren off. They got out, their movements unhurried, almost casual. This was their turf, their routine. They had no idea they were walking onto a stage, every move, every word about to be recorded. Because he needed his mother's reactions to be genuine for the cameras, for the eventual jury, he had called her just moments before, instructing her to come home. He told her there had been a second incident and that he needed her there when the police arrived. He met her at the end of the block and gave her simple instructions. Just act as you normally would. Be scared. Be upset. Let them in and let them do their job. I will handle the rest. She arrived, as planned, just as Mercer and Harker were approaching the house, her car pulling into the driveway with a believable sense of panic. She got out, her face a mask of distress as she saw the officers and the new broken window at the side of the house. It was a masterful performance, rooted in real emotion. "Oh, my heavens, not again!" she cried, her voice trembling. Officer Mercer turned, his face shifting into a look of practiced sympathy. "Mrs. Hale, what are you doing here?" "This is my home. I got a call from my neighbor." "What's happened?" "Looks like another break-in, ma'am," Mercer said, his tone oozing concern. "Don't you worry. We'll handle it. Let's get you inside and see what the damage is this time." Daniel watched on his laptop as his mother unlocked the front door and led the 2 officers inside. The pinhead camera in the painting's frame gave him a perfect view of the living room. They were in. The trap was sprung. He put on a headset, the high-fidelity audio feed piping their voices directly into his ears. The play was about to begin. "Now, Margaret, you just sit right here," Officer Mercer said, his voice a soothing balm of fake empathy. He guided Daniel's mother to her favorite armchair. "Harker and I will do a thorough sweep. Make sure no one's still hiding in here. You just try to relax." On his monitor, Daniel watched his mother bury her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. It was a brilliant, heartbreaking performance. She was selling her fear, and the 2 cops were buying every bit of it. "You check the back, I'll check the front," Mercer said to his partner. The audio was crystal clear. Harker lumbered down the hallway towards the bedrooms, his footsteps heavy. Mercer stayed in the living room with Margaret, asking her a series of pointless questions. "Did you lock all the doors before you left? Have you noticed any suspicious people in the neighborhood?" It was all for show, a performance to keep the victim occupied. Daniel switched his video feed to the camera in the bedroom alarm clock. He watched as Harker entered the room. The officer's movements were no longer methodical. They were purposeful, predatory. He didn't glance around the room. He didn't check under the bed or in the bathroom. He walked directly to the closet. Harker opened the door, and his eyes went straight to the top shelf. He saw the new shoebox. A slow, greasy smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a wolf finding a lamb tethered to a stake. He reached up, his hand closing around the box. He didn't even bother to open it. He knew what was inside. He tucked the box under his arm and walked out of the bedroom. He met Mercer in the hallway. Daniel switched to the smoke detector camera, getting a perfect 2-shot. "Anything?" Mercer asked, his back still to Margaret. Harker just tapped the shoebox under his arm and gave a slight nod. Mercer's own face broke into a triumphant smirk. "All clear back here," he called out to Margaret. "Looks like they were in and out again. Probably scared off when your neighbor called us." They converged in the living room, standing before the still distraught Margaret. "I'm afraid they got you again, ma'am," Mercer said, his voice dripping with false pity. "They seem to have gone through the bedroom closet. Anything valuable up there?" Before his mother could answer, Harker chimed in. "The perfect wingman. We should probably take this box as evidence, Roy. The perp might have left prints on it. He held up the shoebox. It was a brilliant, cynical move. They were creating their own cover story, entering the stolen goods into a phantom evidence locker from which it would promptly disappear. "Good thinking, Cole," Mercer said with a solemn nod. "We'll log it back at the station. Don't you worry, Margaret. We're going to do everything we can to catch these guys." They had the money. Their story was in place. They were home free. They turned to leave, their arrogance palpable. They were invincible, protected by the very badges they were disgracing. They had just committed the perfect crime for the second time, and their victim was the only witness, an old woman no one would ever believe. They were wrong. There was another witness, and he was done watching. As Mercer and Harker reached the front door, confident and self-satisfied, a voice, calm and cold as a winter morning, echoed from the hallway behind them. "Officers, I believe you have something that doesn't belong to you." They froze, their hands on the doorknob. They turned slowly, their faces a mixture of confusion and sudden dawning dread. Daniel Hale stepped out of the shadows of the hallway, his phone in his hand, his expression as impassive and unforgiving as a hanging judge. He hadn't been hiding in the house. He had entered silently through the back door the moment their attention was fixed on the shoebox. The color drained from Roy Mercer's face. The tough guy's swagger evaporated, replaced by a raw, primal fear. Cole Harker's hand instinctively drifted towards the butt of his service weapon. "Don't," Daniel said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying an authority that rooted Harker to the spot. "Don't even think about it." "Who the hell are you?" Mercer stammered, his mind racing, trying to understand how the situation had spiraled out of his control. "You're the son. What is this?" "This is a federal investigation," Daniel stated, his eyes like chips of flint. "And you two are the subjects." He held up his phone, which was still streaming the live video feed from the bedroom. He pressed play on the last 30 seconds of the recording. The two officers watched, horrified, as their own smiling faces appeared on the screen, their hushed, conspiratorial conversation about the shoebox filling the silent room. Every camera, every microphone has been feeding to a secure FBI server for the last hour, Daniel explained in a conversational tone. "The marked bills in that shoebox are already flagged in the Treasury Department database. The money you fenced from Walter Briggs has been traced. The complaints you buried have been unburied. It's over." The world of Mercer and Harker collapsed in that single devastating moment. The intricate web of lies and intimidation they had built over years was torn apart. They were exposed, trapped, with no way out. Mercer, desperate, tried one last gambit. "This is entrapment. You can't do this. We're police officers." "You stopped being police officers the first time you used your badge to rob a senior citizen," Daniel countered, his voice laced with contempt. "You're just common thieves in Halloween costumes." As if on cue, the quiet suburban street outside erupted. The sound of screeching tires and slamming car doors filled the air. Through the front window, Mercer and Harker saw a nightmare unfolding. Unmarked black sedans swarmed the house, disgorging a dozen agents in tactical gear, their weapons drawn. Leading the team was Daniel's supervisor, Paul Rennick, his face grim and determined. The front door burst open. "FBI, hands in the air!" Mercer and Harker, their faces ashen with defeat, slowly raised their hands. The takedown was swift, professional, and brutally efficient. They were pushed against the wall, disarmed, and cuffed. The shoebox was taken from Harker, its contents immediately verified against a list of serial numbers. Daniel stepped back, his part in the drama finished. He walked over to his mother, who had watched the entire scene unfold with a mixture of terror and awe. He gently put a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, Mom," he whispered. "It's over now." She looked up at him, her eyes wide. She was seeing her son, truly seeing him for the first time. Not just the quiet, dutiful boy who always called on Sundays, but the formidable, dangerous man he had become. A man who moved in a world of shadows to protect the light. Her fear was gone, replaced by a wave of immense, overwhelming pride. As Mercer was led past them in handcuffs, his head bowed in shame, his eyes met Daniel's for a fleeting second. In that glance, he finally understood. He hadn't been outsmarted by a civilian. He had picked a fight with a ghost, a specter far more dangerous than anything he had ever encountered on the streets. He and his partner had robbed the wrong old lady. They had stolen from the specter's mother, and they were about to pay the price. The fallout from the arrests of Officers Mercer and Harker was a seismic event that shattered the complacent tranquility of the Northwood Police Department. It was a full-blown corruption scandal, the kind that made national news. The FBI, led officially by Paul Rennick, descended on the precinct, seizing records, interviewing officers, and uncovering a culture of complacency that had allowed the two predators to operate unchecked for years. The pawn shop owner and the car dealer, Mercer's cousins-in-law, folded under federal pressure, giving full confessions in exchange for lesser sentences. The money trail they revealed was even more extensive than Nadia had initially discovered, implicating a desk sergeant who had been paid to bury civilian complaints. The rot went deep. Daniel Hale, the catalyst for the entire operation, remained a ghost. His official involvement was buried under layers of classification. To the world, the investigation began with an anonymous tip to the FBI's public corruption hotline. The name Spectre was never mentioned. He was content to remain in the shadows, his victory measured not in headlines, but in the quiet restoration of justice. A week later, Maple Street had returned to its peaceful rhythm. The unmarked cars were gone. The media had moved on to the next scandal. Daniel sat with his mother on her porch swing, the gentle evening air filled with the scent of her roses. A check from the FBI's Victim Restitution Fund, for the full amount she had lost, plus damages, sat on the small table between them. She hadn't cashed it yet. "They found Mr. Briggs's coins," she said softly, looking out at the street. "And Mrs. Gable's watches. They're returning everything." "I know," Daniel said. He had made sure of it. She was quiet for a long time, the swing moving in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. "That world you live in, Daniel," she said finally, her voice filled with a mother's worry. "It's so dangerous." "The world is dangerous, Mom," he replied, looking at her. "That's why people like me have to exist, so people like you can be safe." She reached over and took his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. The fragility he had seen in her a week ago was gone, replaced by a renewed resilience. The violation had been erased, not just by the return of her money, but by the fierce, protective love of her son. She understood now the quiet strength she had always sensed in him, the reason for his long absences and vague answers. He was a guardian. Her guardian. "I'm proud of you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your father would have been so proud." Daniel felt a warmth spread through his chest, a feeling of peace that had been absent for too long. In his line of work, victories were often abstract, measured in averted disasters and threats neutralized in faraway lands. But this was real. This was tangible. He had protected his home. He had defended his mother. He had faced down the monsters who came in the light of day, and he had won. He stayed for another 2 days, fixing the broken window, helping in the garden, and just being a son. It was a brief, precious return to a life he had left behind, a reminder of what he was fighting for. The quiet, the normal, the good. On the 3rd day, his encrypted phone rang. It was Paul Rennick. A new threat was emerging, a shadow falling over a different part of the world. He was needed. He packed his bag, the life of Daniel Hale receding as the specter prepared to reemerge. He hugged his mother at the front door, a long, heartfelt embrace. "You be careful," she whispered. "Always," he promised. Daniel stood on his mother's porch, the familiar weight of his go-bag on his shoulder. The quiet suburban street, once a scene of violation, was now a portrait of peace, basking in the golden light of late afternoon. The system had failed his mother, its sworn protectors turning into predators. But he hadn't failed her. He was the quiet variable, the unseen force that balanced the scales. His work here was done. His phone vibrated with an encrypted summons. A new mission, a new darkness awaited his attention. He answered, his voice calm and professional, already a world away. But as he walked towards the waiting car, he left home not with a sense of duty, but with a profound and settled peace, knowing the most important person in his life was finally, truly safe.